I'm Andrew Patterson from interest.co.nz. Welcome to another in our Business Success series. With me today, the Managing Director of Living Cell Technologies, Dr. Andrea Grant. Welcome.
Hello, Andrew.
So, Andrew, just explain Living Cell Technologies. They're a biotech company listed in Australia, but with your operations here in New Zealand. So tell us a bit about the research you're involved in.
Well, we're a cell therapy company, but we're a cell therapy company with a difference. We use pig cells for our treatments. We have two products in development, one for treatment of type 1 diabetes and the second for treatment for Parkinson's. Now, one of the unique aspects of Living Cell Technologies is that we have developed a system called encapsulation, and that allows us to put the pig cells into a protective capsule so that when we put them into your stomach or into your brain, they're not attacked by the immune system. That's called Immupel, basically. And that allows us to transplant animal cells across to humans and for the cells to survive, basically. So we're right up there with all of the cell therapy companies in the world.
And the Parkinson's treatment?
Well, again, that's a cell therapy treatment. What we're doing is we're taking cells from the pig brain, again, encapsulating them and then putting them deep into the patient's brain in the area of the brain that has actually lost all of its dopamine-producing neurons. As you know, dopamine is the key neurotransmitter that's involved in movement and in emotion and cognition. So what we're doing is we're putting a cell in that actually causes those dopamine neurons to regenerate and to reform.
Now, we know diabetes is a hugely in a growth phase, isn't it, as a condition. How does your treatment fit in, and what particular type of diabetics are you focused on? Okay,
so there's two types of diabetes. Type 1 diabetes, which is where the patient has lost their insulin-producing cells because they've been attacked by their own immune system. And then type 2 diabetes is normally what people call the acquired form of diabetes. So that's normally related to diet and to lifestyle challenges. So the type of diabetes that our product is targeted to is type 1 diabetes, so the autoimmune disease. Now, because the patients have lost their islet cells, which are the cells in your pancreas that produce insulin, what we're simply doing, it's a very simple concept, is we're giving the people with diabetes new islets in the form of pig islets, and they take over the patient's blood glucose control and secrete insulin when the patient eats a meal and so on when their glucose rises.
So it sounds simple, but obviously this is highly complex and a lot of research involved to make it happen.
Yeah, the concept is simple. The actual execution of the concept it has taken a great deal of research, but I'm very pleased to say that we are now in the final stage of our clinical trials with the type 1 diabetes product, and we have the goal to launch the product in New Zealand in 2016. That's our current target.
What are the complications of running a biotech in New Zealand, particularly? How difficult is it? Because, I mean, you're not sort of a standard business model where you're selling a product, you're in development phase. Obviously, you've got funding issues constantly, staff and research requirements. What are the particular challenges you face as a business?
I'm not sure if you mean whether their challenge is unique to New Zealand, because actually most of the world, that's biotechs all over the world, suffer the same challenges, which is, as you say, securing capital whilst you're still in that pre-revenue R&D phase. It's perhaps a little bit more difficult in New Zealand because, of course, the capital markets are not as fluid and as large as you would find, say, in the US and Europe. The other issue with New Zealand is the tyranny of distance. Certainly at the time when Europe and the US were leading the charge in partnering with biotech companies, of course, now what we're seeing is a shift towards Asia. And China and Chinese and Japanese companies are actually moving into the partnering domain much more proactively than Europe and US, and there New Zealand has a great advantage, as we've shown recently with our partnership with the Japanese.
You just explain a bit about that, because it's a fairly unique joint venture arrangement, isn't it?
Yeah, we're very excited about it, actually. So The way in which we've partnered with Otsuka is firstly around the type 1 diabetes product. So there what we've done is we formed a joint venture, which is a privately held limited company based here in New Zealand. Otsuka and LCT are 50-50 joint shareholders. Now, at the time of formation, LCT put the intellectual property around the diabetes product into the joint venture, and Otsuka put 25 million Australian dollars for the continued development of that product. Now, the company itself doesn't actually do any research and development. They contract back to Living Cell Technologies and pay service revenues to Living Cell Technologies to continue the development of Diabecel through to market. And through essentially the funding that was put into the joint venture, Diatrans Otsuka Limited, is sufficient to take Diabecel through to that marketing date of 2016. Because it's a 50-50 joint venture, once the product goes to market and is creating revenue and value and greater value, then LCT receives 50% of the future profits. So now let me compare that to a typical biotech deal, where normally a biotech company at a phase 2 stage, which is where we were, would partner with a pharmaceutical company, the biotech would receive some cash up front, but most of the value would come downstream when the product comes to market in the form of a percentage royalty share. Now, at a phase 2, which is when we partnered with Otsuka, you probably do well to get a 1 to 3% royalty share. So now come back to our 50% profit share, assume a 70% profit margin. You'd have to basically secure a 35% royalty share to get the same downstream value return. So it's a really lucrative model, but there are other aspects to it that make it very attractive and quite powerful for a biotech company. The first being that it's a joint venture, so we've got shared control over the development of the product, and that really capitalizes on LCT's intellectual property and the knowledge and experience that we have with the product. Then the second aspect of it that's quite powerful for a small company is we've focused the whole partnership around a single field of IP, diabetes, which means that all of the intellectual property, the technology platform, the know-how that can be used within LCT to apply it to other disease areas such as Parkinson's, hearing loss, and so on. So we haven't licensed the whole garden shed across. We've actually kept 90% of the value for ongoing development.
And this also means that the IP is retained within the joint venture as well too.
Yes, only in the field of diabetes though. So the joint venture is only able to use the IP to develop cell therapy treatments for diabetes. The rights to use all of that intellectual property in any other disease area stays with LCT, and right. That's the power of the model.
And why the decision to list in Australia but base yourself here?
At the time, so the company's always been based in New Zealand and intends to remain, have its global headquarters here in New Zealand. That's important to us. At the time, the New Zealand stock market was not very open to biotech companies, and it was also relatively small in terms of liquidity. Genesis were... at that time, we're starting to go through their troubles. So the Australian market gave us a greater amount of liquidity and exposure in the biotech space.
When we think about the sort of work you're doing, I mean, how significant is this when you complete, hopefully successfully, the outcome? How significant is this going to be for diabetes sufferers?
Well, the first group of people with type 1 diabetes that will benefit from our product Diabecel is patients who are typically called unstable diabetics, or patients who essentially are not able to achieve good glucose control despite receiving the standard of care, which is intensive insulin therapy. So these are people who watch what they eat, they're very careful, they manage their exercise well, they manage their insulin and their glucose, they're testing really well, yet they still can't achieve good glucose control. And one of the features of this, is the patient, they experience what are called unaware hypoglycemic events or unaware hypos. And this is where their blood glucose drops, but they're completely unaware that it's dropping. So for you and I, we would normally sweat, we'd get the shakes, and we'd probably get a bit grumpy, and we'd go, oh, well, I need to eat. For people who've become unstable diabetics, they have no signal and then may suddenly just lose consciousness in front of you or become very delirious. And that, if you're on your own and there's no one to help you actually take a bolus of glucose, can be very dangerous. And so people who are living with this stage of diabetes tend to be limited in the jobs they can do. They limit their daily activities. They're not allowed to sleep alone and so on. So their quality of life is really diminished, but also their long-term outcomes in terms of kidney disease and eye disease and so on is quite poor.
Of course, the issue for you is doing a lot with very limited funding. That's the issue. So at the moment, you're at the phase of having to really control your costs as tightly as you possibly can.
Well, obviously, with the partnership with the Japanese company, that's actually allowed us to extend and expand our research and development much faster than we would have done if we were still relying just on capital markets and in private investors or listed investors. Certainly, you're always conserving your finances, but I think we've been able to actually get a long way to market really on relatively what's been a kind of frugal existence.
Because the metric every biotech company looks at is kind of cash burn rate, doesn't it?
Absolutely. But again, this is the wonderful thing about the partnership with the Japanese. So the joint venture now pays for all of the research and development for the type 1 diabetes product. Now, in addition to that partnership, we've also formed a co-development agreement with Otsuka around the Parkinson's product. Now, that currently is an agreement where they're funding the clinical trials, the phase 1 clinical trials for the Parkinson's product. So again, none of LCT's cash is being used up or burnt on that program. So our 2 lead clinical programs are fully funded. We've got a cash balance of 5 million currently, Australian, and our burn rate with the majority of our clinical development funded, our burn rate is less than $1 million per annum. So we have a long runway that's a lot more than sufficient for us to see those products to market and for us to actually start to secure revenue.
Reassuring for investors. What about the likelihood that one of the major pharma companies comes along and just buys you out when you get to that point of almost being ready to go into the market?
Well, actually, Otsuka are a major pharmaceutical company. They're actually in the top tier of the Japanese pharmaceutical companies, top 5. So they may not be well known in a kind of Western sphere, but they're a significant player globally. They have revenues of $5 billion per annum and assets of $20 billion US. And they market a product, one of the best-selling neurological products called Abilify, which is a drug for schizophrenia. And it's one of the top sellers in the US and Europe. So although they may not be a brand name such as Glaxo and Roche and so on, they are actually a significant pharmaceutical company. Now, would they buy us out in the end, which is probably what you're jumping to next? For Otsuka, one of their kind of biggest values is partnership. And they also were very keen to actually engage in the New Zealand market and the New Zealand innovation market. So they're kind of here for the long play. And to them to have an investment in New Zealand and a significant base in New Zealand is actually really important to them.
The biotech sector has had a sort of a bit of a roller coaster ride in New Zealand, and you're perhaps one of the survivors. Been around since 2000. You've seen it through all those sort of different phases. But what's your sense about where that sector is sitting at the moment and the potential for it to grow in the future?
I think the future looks very bright right now for biotech in New Zealand. There was a rocky road, But you have companies now like A2, Photons, the Pacific Edge, who have now got their US approval to start marketing there. Ourselves, Living Cell Technologies, Mesynthes. So there's some real exciting companies out there who are either very close to revenue or already at revenue. And I think that investors are recognizing that and really coming into the sector again. So I think it's really looking like it's going to go through another boom.
Do you cooperate in any sort of a loose way?
Absolutely. It's a relatively small sector. We know each other. We're very supportive of each other because we all share that same vision that New Zealand will become recognised as a true biotech innovation centre, because we have the knowledge, we have the intellectual capital, we have the drive. And so I think it can be done.
What could support that vision more in the future from government assistance or industry support, or what else could perhaps speed that process up, do you think?
Well, Living Cell Technologies have a great relationship with the government, and we've actually been able to secure about 7 million New Zealand dollars of grant funding through the government over our time since 2000. So really we don't have a great deal to complain about in terms of government support. I think a couple of challenges exist in the New Zealand environment. One is fragmentation, and the fact that, for example, that each company is relatively small on a global scale, so that our turnovers and so on are not as vast as some of the other biotechs. So I think that's a challenge for us as a country, if you like, or as a sector. The other place that my personal thinking is going at the moment is what kind of programs could we work with the government on medium enterprise type funding, where it's not so much grant based, but we're looking at how do we support the next phase of growth for the next 5 to 10 years, and what kind of partnerships can we make where there's value that's returned to the government. So that's where some of our thinking's going at the moment.
You have around 60 staff working here at your facility in Auckland, and what about the issue of securing that? There's often comment made about trying to get staff with appropriate science and research backgrounds. Is that a challenge for you as well?
Well, we've got 66 people, and they're actually across 4 sites in New Zealand. So we have our pig facility down in Invercargill. That's where we keep our herd of unique pigs, which really form a critical basis of the company. And then we also have a pig facility here in Kumu, R&D and corporates based here, and a small animal facility off-site. So what are the challenges with keeping the staff? They're varied because we actually do have a very wide spectrum of staff in those operations. We're lucky, LCT is lucky, because we actually are recognised as world leaders in what we do, and so that allows us some leeway in terms of attracting international staff. We've just actually engaged someone from the US. She's come over from Geron, which is another big US cell therapy company. But I guess the fundamental challenge is New Zealand is a relatively low GDP country, so our wages kind of in that medium band are not internationally competitive, and so pretty much every employment that I've made since I've been in this role, I've had to explain why the immigrant, if you like, the expat, is going to take a significant hit in their salary.
Now, you've been nominated for the High Tech Awards, and you've also got Company of the Year, the Biotech Company of the Year as well too. So obviously some recognition beginning to come through into the marketplace. That must be pleasing as a chief executive. Very
pleasing, and I think it's great for the team. A lot of our team have actually been with us for a number of years, and for them to see their efforts being recognised by the industry and by the innovation sector, I think is a great accolade to them. And it reflects the stage that LCT is at. We've got 2 products in clinical development. We are very close to market with one of those, so close to driving revenues with one of those, and a significant partnership with a solid, good, strong, solid pharmaceutical company. So I think it really reflects where we stand today compared to where we stood, say, 4 or 5 years ago when we were very early stage.
And it's finally, you've set yourself some ambitious goals by 2020 as well, because you want to have more products in the pipeline.
Absolutely. Yeah, so we are not resting on our laurels. We want to grow. We want to be a significant biopharmaceutical company that can fly on the New Zealand flag as an example of pure innovation and commercial success.
And the most satisfying aspect of working in a business like this for yourself? Because I mean, you've got a very strong science background, obviously. Yeah. So the multiple choices of businesses and areas you could be in. Absolutely. So why the choice for this business?
Twofold, really. The people. I think the drive here to be successful and to bring the treatments to patients is just immense. It's palpable when you walk through the door. And then the second is I am a scientist at heart. I'm a geek at heart, but I'm a geek who pursues meaning, and to see science produce something truly of value, both commercially but also on a personal and health level, really drives you.
Do you find this sort of some conflict of the challenge there? Scientists generally want to be in the lab doing the science, not necessarily running the business. Does that create some conflict for you?
For me personally, yes. No. I moved over to the dark side of business many years ago. So I love the fact that I can be a business and commercial person, but with a science background.